I'm truly envious that Brynner possesses a face so strikingly similar to that of a pharaoh the director of the Ten Commandments reportedly exclaimed during filming. It was precisely those facial features imbued with an unmistakably ancient aura that propelled Yul Brynner to extraordinary success and cemented him as an irreplaceable icon of Hollywood's golden age, and he was far from the only one. During the Golden Age, many screen legends seemed to carry the imprint of history itself. Some were likened to Livia Drusilla. Others bore an uncanny resemblance to centuries-old, even millennia-old portraits of Marcus Aurelius. There were even those who, with a single glance, immediately reminded audiences of Abraham Lincoln. In today's video, we will explore the legendary faces of Hollywood's Golden Age stars, whose appearances resemble people from the ancient past in the most uncanny ways. 1. Yul Brynner, a pharaoh's face stepping out of Egyptian stone.
To finish this city, the strain in that stone is too great. We cannot wait. Red pennant! Red pennant!
In ancient Egyptian art, pharaohs were not portrayed as living human beings. They were depicted as concepts. Pharaoh statues were carved to transcend time, to never age, never change, never react. As a result, their faces speak a very specific visual language. A broad, flat forehead, an almost perfectly straight nose, narrow yet deep-set eyes devoid of expression, and a square, rigid jaw as if every emotion were sealed tightly within stone. Standing before statues of Ramses II, Amenhotep III, or the countless anonymous pharaohs housed in the Cairo Museum or the British Museum, many people share the same unsettling sensation. It is not that we are looking at them, but that they are looking straight through us. There is no curiosity, no judgment, only existence, as though they have grown accustomed to being gazed upon for millennia. Yul Brynner carried precisely that sensation. Not because he shaved his head, many people do, and few produce this effect. What made Brynner resemble a pharaoh lay in the structure of his facial bones and the authority radiating from his silence. His forehead was flat and expansive, unbroken by expressive creases. His nose straight, neither curved nor softened. His cheekbones high but not sharp. And most notably, his jaw square heavy, giving the impression of something carved from stone rather than flesh. But the most haunting element was his gaze. Yul Brynner's eyes did not perform. They did not seek empathy, nor did they invite connection. They were still cold and possessed a near emotionless certainty, the same gaze found in pharaoh statues where eyes were carved to endure thousands of years without change. When placed beside statues of Ramses II, especially well-preserved versions, the resemblance goes beyond mere association. It becomes a match of proportions, forehead, nose, jaw, and more importantly, the same sense of unquestioned power. Brynner does not resemble Ramses as a copy, but as though both were molded from the same archetype of authority. This appearance granted Brynner a rare cinematic advantage. He did not need to raise his voice to dominate a frame. He did not need aggressive movement to command attention. Simply standing still, he became the center. Hollywood quickly realized that this was not the face of a supporting character, nor of an ordinary man. As a result, Brynner seemed almost destined for roles of kings, rulers, and men who held the power of life and death. When he portrayed Ramses in the Ten Commandments, it felt less like an actor transforming into a character and more like a return. Audiences did not need convincing. They accepted his authority the moment he appeared. Yet that same pharaonic beauty was also a cruel limitation. Yul Brynner was rarely allowed to be weak. Audiences could not accept him as hesitant, uncertain, or mundane. His face did not permit him to dissolve into everyday life. Even when cast as an ordinary man, he still radiated a sense of standing above circumstance. He was respected, but seldom loved in an intimate way. His face created a natural distance, much like the distance between a museum visitor and a stone statue. The most unsettling aspect was the sense of familiarity people could not name. Many viewers, upon first seeing Brynner, experienced an instinctive reaction: "I've seen this face before." not in cinema but somewhere deeper in cultural memory in museum halls and history taught through stone imagery. As though history once used this face to speak of absolute power, then set it aside. And cinema somehow called it back. But if Yul Brynner embodies the image of a king turned to stone, the next face could not be more different, not the face of divine authority, but of the ideal human, a civilization wished to remember. 2. Paul Newman, ancient Roman beauty in the form of a bust. If ancient Egypt used statues to immortalize divine authority, ancient Rome used portrait busts to immortalize humanity. Roman busts did not aim for supernatural perfection, but for balance, reason, and dignity. These were the faces of senators, generals, and officials, men who embodied social order. Paul Newman carried that spirit effortlessly. Newman's face is almost a lesson in classical anatomy. A moderately high forehead, a straight nose, a strong but uncoarse jaw, and facial symmetry so precise. It is rarely seen. Nothing overwhelms. Yet it is precisely this absence of excess that creates enduring appeal, much like Roman busts that stand quietly in museums yet compel viewers to linger. When Paul Newman is placed beside busts of a young Marcus Aurelius or anonymous Roman senators preserved by time, the resemblance becomes evident in the jawline and the eyes. Deep-set eyes that look straight ahead, not confrontational, but assured. The gaze of someone who understands his place within an order and does not need to assert it. Many Roman busts bear broken noses or chipped ears, and when people look at Newman, a strange thought emerges. This is the same face, simply restored, as though stone had returned to flesh. This Roman beauty gave Newman a rare cinematic advantage: versatility without loss of credibility. Hero, anti-hero, fallen man, rebel, all could exist within the same face because it was the face of rational humanity, not pushed to extremes. Yet that beauty also imposed a subtle limitation. Paul Newman could never truly appear ordinary. Even when portraying laborers' failures or men crushed by society, something always felt off. His face carried the dignity of someone meant for higher standing, like a Roman senator misplaced in a roadside bar. That is the trap of Roman beauty: it always implies dignity, even when the script tries to strip it away. Notably, Newman does not resemble any single historical figure by name. He resembles a type the ideal citizen Rome once sought to replicate through portraiture, a face representing reason, order, and human worth. As though after the empire's fall, history preserved that face, waiting until cinema matured enough to tell stories with light instead of stone. And if an Egyptian king and a Roman citizen can return in such forms, the next question becomes inevitable. Would the faces created to represent goddesses and noble women leave traces on the features of the next great stars? 3. Elizabeth Taylor, an ancient Greek/Roman noblewoman reborn with legendary violet eyes. In ancient Greek and Roman art, upper-class women were depicted according to strict aesthetic rules. High symmetry, broad foreheads, straight noses, full but restrained lips, large, deep-set eyes often gazing slightly away from the viewer as if fixed on another realm. This was not the beauty of everyday life, it was the beauty of status, lineage, and myth. Elizabeth Taylor embodied this formula almost completely. Even in her youth, Taylor's face appeared unnervingly finished. There was no transitional phase, no sense of beauty still forming. She emerged like a statue already polished. Every feature from forehead to nose, cheekbones to chin seemed to follow the same classical proportions seen on Roman coins bearing noblewomen's likenesses or on female busts from the Augustan era. But what makes the comparison truly unsettling are her eyes. Elizabeth Taylor's violet eyes are famously rare, almost non-existent in conventional biology. Yet in ancient art, eye color was never merely biological, it was symbolic. In Greek, Roman, and later Byzantine imagery, the eyes of goddesses and noblewomen were often rendered unnaturally dark or intense, emphasizing that these figures did not fully belong to the mortal world. When Elizabeth Taylor is placed beside portraits believed to depict Livia Drusilla, or anonymous Roman patrician women, the resemblance does not lie in isolated details but in composition. The same flat forehead, the same openness of the eyes, the same full yet firm lips, as though history once employed a single aesthetic mold for women born to represent, and that mold reappeared in Taylor. It is not that Elizabeth Taylor looks like ancient women. It is that ancient women look like Elizabeth Taylor. This monumental beauty granted Taylor near absolute cinematic power. The camera responded to her differently, not because she acted better than others, but because she existed in a way that could not be ignored. In many scenes, she needed neither movement nor dialogue. Simply standing still, her gaze created gravitational pull. But here that beauty became a historical burden. Elizabeth Taylor was never allowed to age naturally. Every mark of time on her face was perceived as the collapse of a monument. The public did not see her as a woman, but as an ancient artifact deteriorating. And when her personal life grew chaotic, society responded not with empathy but disappointment, as though a goddess had betrayed the image imposed upon her. And when a face carries the memory of myth and ancient lineage, the next question becomes unavoidable. Does history also reuse the faces meant to embody morality and conscience? 4. Gregory Peck, the Lincoln-era face in 19th-century political portraiture. In the history of 19th-century political photography and painting, especially during the American Civil War, there exists a very particular type of face. It is the face of men carrying moral responsibility on their shoulders, a high forehead, defined cheekbones, a neat jawline, deep and serious eyes, restrained expression. As if every feature were saying, "I understand what I am bearing." Gregory Peck possessed exactly that face. When you watch Peck stand still before a camera, the first sensation is not, "This is an actor," but "This is someone delivering a statement." His face naturally carries the shape of speech, of argument, of public duty. It is a kind of presence that cannot be trained, something that seems forged into the bone. Place Gregory Peck beside portraits of Abraham Lincoln, Charles Sumner, or Civil War-era politicians, and the resemblance becomes clear, particularly in the eyes and the cheekbone structure. Peck's gaze is deep, slightly hollowed, not trying to conquer the person in front of him but weighing something larger. High cheekbones and a closed mouth create an impression of discipline and restraint. There are archival photographs from the 1850s to 1860s that, when flipped through quickly, can genuinely startle you. Why is Gregory Peck in this file? You know it is impossible, yet the sense of familiarity refuses to disappear. This Lincoln-era beauty gave Peck a rare advantage in cinema. Audiences believed him immediately. No long explanations, no elaborate character building. Peck only had to appear, and moral credibility arrived with him. Hollywood therefore often cast him as the embodiment of social conscience, justice, and what is right. But it was also an invisible cage. Gregory Peck found it difficult to escape the image of the righteous man. He struggled to inhabit ambiguity, villainy, or moral compromise without something feeling wrong. That face does not allow him to lie convincingly. Whenever Peck appears in a role surrounded by doubt, audiences instinctively lean toward him, just as people trust 19th-century political portraits simply because the subjects look upright. This beauty turned Peck into an icon, but it also robbed him of the right to be unclear. He was not allowed to lose his way, not allowed to display weakness openly. His face seems as though history assigned it a task to stand on the side of what is right. The strange thing is, this Gregory Peck does not resemble one single politician in particular. He resembles an entire type, the kind of man the 19th century produced to represent public morality. As if whenever society needed a face to trust, history chose the same mold. And when that mold reappeared on 20th century cinema screens, the question stopped being whether it was coincidence at all and became this: how many human roles repeat themselves along with the same familiar faces? If faces of power, lineage, and morality can return, then what happens to faces born to lead through strength? The answer waits in the face of Charlton Heston. 5. Charlton Heston, the face of a religious leader / ancient warrior. Charlton Heston did not carry the beauty of a man searching for his place in the world. His face carries the sensation of someone who has known where he stands for a very long time. You can see it in the bone structure immediately: a square, heavy jaw, high cheekbones, a broad forehead, a straight nose, features that look as if they were drawn with a ruler rather than formed by chance. Everything on that face points forward, nothing excess, nothing hesitant. In ancient art, especially the statues of warriors and religious leaders across the Near East and the Mediterranean, there exists a remarkably consistent facial type. You see it in medieval depictions of Moses built from Jewish tradition, in Assyrian warrior reliefs, in late-period Greek heroic sculpture. It is a face created not to reveal inner life, but to execute will. Eyes forward, mouth sealed, a chin locked like the hinge of authority. Charlton Heston matches that type exactly. Set Heston beside Michelangelo's Moses, and the similarity is not in any single detail, but in the total presence. The same hard jaw, the same gaze that does not ask for agreement, the same feeling that this man does not wonder should I, but only when. Even without costume or makeup, Heston carries the outline of a religious leader accustomed to standing before crowds and declaring non-negotiable truths. This explains why Heston almost never had to act when playing ancient leaders. In the Ten Commandments, he does not become Moses in a psychological sense. He feels like a version of Moses that already existed, simply appearing in a modern body. Audiences do not need persuasion that he has the right to lead. His face already speaks the language of moral authority. This beauty gave Heston a rare advantage in epic cinema. He could stand inside enormous settings surrounded by hundreds of extras and still never be swallowed. The camera does not have to hunt for him. He creates the axis of the frame by himself. In crowd scenes, the audience's eyes naturally drift toward him, like how our gaze seeks the leader statue inside an ancient sculptural complex. But that advantage is also a brutal limitation. Charlton Heston has almost no room to be ordinary. His face does not allow him to be ambiguous, fragile, or small. When he plays an everyday man, there is always the sense that the character is temporarily living beneath his true rank. Audiences cannot quite believe Heston could be the one being led. They keep waiting for him to rise and point the way. On a personal level, that leader-like beauty also creates distance. It is not a beauty that invites, but a beauty that demands submission. People admire Heston more than they want to understand him. He is viewed as a symbol of moral strength, but rarely granted permission to show vulnerability. What makes many people pause is this: Heston does not resemble any single ancient leader recorded in detail by history. He resembles a leader archetype that has persisted across civilizations, repeated from Assyria to Greece, from the Bible to Renaissance art. As if history forgets their names but remembers their faces perfectly. And when that face reappears in the 20th century, cinema does only one thing: it places light upon it. After the image of men born to command history shifts again toward another kind of power, more subtle, quieter, yet no less sharp. A power that does not come from a loud voice, but from a gaze that makes others hesitate. 6. Bette Davis, a duplicate of 18th to 19th century European ladies in portrait painting. If Charlton Heston carries the power of someone standing before a crowd, Bette Davis carries the power of someone who sits still and watches. Davis's face is not balanced by classical standards, nor softened by Hollywood norms. But it is precisely that imperfection that makes her uncannily similar to aristocratic women in 18th to 19th century European portrait paintings. In oil portraits of this period, especially British and French society portraits, you often see a very specific kind of gaze. It is not inviting, and it is not gentle. It is the gaze of women who understand their social position, understand they are being watched, and choose to watch back. Bette Davis possessed exactly that gaze. Place Davis beside portraits of Sarah Siddons, the famed actress and society figure of the late 18th century, or aristocratic women painted by Thomas Gainsborough and Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, and the resemblance appears instantly in the eyes. Davis's eyes are large, slightly protruding, direct, unflinching. That gaze does not seek to be liked. It feels as if it is assessing the person in front of her, deciding whether they deserve to enter her space. Davis's face is not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her nose is not delicate, her mouth not soft, her lines sometimes described as harsh. But in aristocratic portraiture of the 18th to 19th centuries, beauty was not about perfect harmony. It was about controlled presence. Those women may not have held formal political power, but they held social, psychological, and familial power. Their gaze was a tool of survival. This gave Bette Davis a uniquely powerful advantage in cinema. She could never be reduced to decoration. Whether her role was large or small, her eyes forced the audience to pay attention. Davis did not need to move much. She only had to look, and conflict appeared. But in exchange, that same beauty often branded her as unlikable. In an industry trained to worship softness in women, Davis's blade-like stare was treated as a threat. She did not fit the innocent love interest or the quietly suffering woman. Her face did not allow her to exist merely as a background for someone else to shine. Here lies a clear paradox. The very quality that makes Davis resemble powerful aristocratic women in old portraits is also what made her appear unfeminine by Hollywood standards. Like those women of the 18th to 19th centuries, she was respected, but not always loved. The most unsettling feeling is this: when you look at Bette Davis, you do not see a 20th century woman performing power. You see a kind of woman who has existed for a very long time, one for whom the gaze is both the only permitted defense and the only permitted form of domination. As if that face once sat in grand drawing rooms beneath candlelight, quietly deciding the fate of everyone around her. And when cinema accidentally calls back that face, it does not merely call back an actress, it calls back an entire history of silent power. After women who see through everything without needing to speak, the story of faces that once existed still does not end. Because there are faces that carry neither brute power nor sharpness, but an entire layer of a vanished culture, so that one look is enough to tell where they come from. 7. Laurence Olivier, the face of the modern era, British-French aristocracy. Laurence Olivier did not possess a striking beauty, nor did he have sharply dramatic features that stopped people through surprise alone. What made Olivier's face distinctive was a sense of correctness that is difficult to explain, as though it had already been tested by history before ever appearing on screen. In portraits of British and French aristocracy from the late 18th to the mid-19th century, there exists a remarkably consistent facial structure. A straight nose, a neat chin, moderately thin lips, calm eyes, restrained expression. This is the face of people raised to control themselves because their social position does not permit emotional excess. Laurence Olivier matches this type precisely. Place Olivier beside portraits painted by Thomas Gainsborough or Sir Joshua Reynolds, especially those of young male aristocrats, and the resemblance requires no effort to perceive. The same refined facial proportions. The same slightly averted gaze, never looking directly at the viewer, as if the eyes are always oriented toward some ceremonial space beyond the frame. In France, when compared to early portraits of Talleyrand or to gentlemen depicted in the works of Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, the resemblance becomes even clearer. Not because individual features align perfectly, but because the same cultural layer is etched into the face restraint formality and an invisible distance from the observer. What matters is, this Olivier does not resemble any single aristocrat recorded in history. He resembles a type, the kind of person born into a system of etiquette where every movement carries representational weight. His face does not say who I am, but where I belong. This beauty gave Olivier a clear advantage in his acting career. He never had to strive to appear elevated. The moment he entered the frame, he carried the aura of status and education with him. This is precisely why he was so well suited to Shakespeare, to classical tragedy, to characters deeply conscious of their social role. But that advantage came with subtle inconveniences. Laurence Olivier found it difficult to escape the appearance of being trained. Even when playing the poor or the tormented, his face still suggested someone who had once been taught how to stand upright. The elegance never vanished, It was merely suppressed. As a result, some of Olivier's everyday roles always felt slightly distant, as though the character never fully dissolved into circumstance. In life, that aristocratic beauty created a similar distance. Olivier was not the kind of man who inspired easy intimacy. People respected him more than they wished to approach him. His face seemed accustomed to being viewed from afar within a painted frame on a stage under lights, rather than within the disorder of ordinary life. The strange sensation is this: when looking at Olivier, one does not see an actor transforming into an aristocrat. One sees an aristocrat using acting as his natural language. As though he did not borrow history to perform roles, but history borrowed him to briefly restore a vanished order. And when faces carrying such dense layers of an old culture continue to appear, an unavoidable thought begins to surface. Are there faces that carry neither status nor power, but only the fragile memory of an era that has disappeared? That feeling leads directly to the image of Audrey Hepburn. 8. Audrey Hepburn, like a figure from early 20th century European portraits. Audrey Hepburn did not possess the beauty of a singular individual. She possessed the beauty of a historical moment. When looking back at portraits of European women from the late 19th to the early 20th century, especially post-Victorian studio photography, one often encounters a very specific visual type. Simple backdrops, soft lighting, a straight but slender posture, a long neck, narrow shoulders, eyes turned slightly away from the camera. These were images of women living in a transitional era when old etiquette had not yet vanished, but the modern world was already knocking at the door. Audrey Hepburn mirrors these women exactly. Audrey's neck was unusually long, reminiscent of how early 20th century photographers deliberately elongated their subjects' necks to evoke purity. Her jawline was neat, neither sharp nor round. Her face was small, yet not fragile. Her eyes were large and melancholy, carrying a distinctly European weariness, the quiet sorrow of a generation shaped by war scarcity and rupture. When placing Audrey beside photographs by pioneers like Nadar, or beside portraits of young women in the paintings of John Singer Sargent, a sense of familiarity emerges instantly. Not because they resemble Audrey, but because Audrey resembles them so uncannily, as if she were simply one among many such faces carried forward into the late 20th century by chance. What unsettles many people is this feeling Audrey does not resemble a single individual. She resembles an entire era, an era of women taught to be silent, elegant, and enduring. Their beauty was not meant to attract attention, but to express self-control and dignity within a turbulent world. This beauty gave Audrey a uniquely powerful advantage in cinema. She was never bound to trends or fashion cycles. Audrey could wear minimalist clothing, masculine tailoring, or classical dresses and still appear right. Because she did not represent fashion, she represented aesthetic memory. At the same time that beauty caused her many difficulties. The public did not allow her to be coarse, angry, or rebellious. They loved Audrey the way one loves an old photograph, beautiful, fragile, and forbidden to change. Each time she stepped outside that image, the backlash was disproportionately intense. Within Audrey lies a profound paradox. She was celebrated for carrying the beauty of a lost era, yet forced to live in a world with no room for such fragility, as though she were a memory misplaced in the present. When people look at Audrey Hepburn, they do not see a movie star performing. They see an image that once existed in paintings and old photographs, now awakened by the camera. From here, the thread of the story turns again toward faces that carry neither the memory of art nor aristocracy, but very specific social standards, so clearly defined that they feel as though they were once mass-produced in a nation's old photo albums. 9. Clark Gable, the silhouette of a gentleman in early 20th century archival photography. Clark Gable was not the kind of man who made people look twice because he was unusual. On the contrary, his face carried a sense of familiarity that is difficult to explain, as though it had already existed somewhere long before cinema turned him into an icon. And it is precisely that familiarity that matters. In early 20th century archival photo collections, especially images of middle-class men, landowners, small business owners, reserve officers, you repeatedly encounter the same facial type. Neatly combed hair, carefully trimmed mustaches, a defined but non-threatening jawline, a confident but measured smile, eyes that are neither dreamy nor aggressive. These are the faces of men society trusts, heads of households, signers of documents, men invited to sit in the front rows of local events. Clark Gable fits that type exactly. Place Gable's photograph beside portraits of early 20th century American businessmen or among family albums of Midwestern middle-class households, and the resemblance is immediate. Not in individual features, but in the overall image. Gable's mustache is not a personal flourish, it is part of a masculine standard of the time. His jaw conveys solidity rather than menace. His smile is not theatrical seduction, but the smile of someone accustomed to being trusted. This beauty gave Gable an enormous cinematic advantage. Audiences did not need time to accept him. From the moment he appeared, he already looked like he belonged in that world. Hollywood did not need to construct masculinity for Clark Gable. They only had to point a camera at a face that already aligned with social expectations. That is why Clark Gable quickly became the archetypal, classic leading man. But what is crucial is this: he was not celebrated for being different, but for being representative. Gable was like a perfectly distilled version of what early 20th century society considered a proper man. Yet that same quality also imposed a clear limitation. Clark Gable found it difficult to escape the image of the central man. Even when playing rebels or failures, his face still suggested that the character would eventually reclaim his position. Audiences rarely believed Gable could remain marginalized for long. He looked like someone society would ultimately rearrange itself around. In real life, that correct beauty also turned Gable into a projection screen for collective expectations. People loved him not only for who he was, but because he resembled the men they already knew from old photographs, family memories, and repeatedly reinforced social templates. What gives pause is this: Hollywood did not create the Clark Gable type. Hollywood recognized it. As though it looked out at society, selected the most emblematic face and elevated it into an icon. And when you flip through old photo albums, that feeling becomes even clearer. Clark Gable was not an exception. He was the one chosen to represent a majority that once existed. From the image of a man who embodies social norms, the story turns again toward a very different kind of beauty. One that does not represent the collective, does not anchor itself in power or convention, but is tied instead to purity and inner depth, cultivated within a very specific cultural tradition. 10. Ingrid Bergman, like a muse from modern-era Northern European portraits. Ingrid Bergman did not possess a beauty that demanded instant admiration, nor did she have sharp or dramatic features. Yet the longer one looks at her face, the stronger an indescribable sensation becomes the feeling that this face has existed before, in another place, within another culture. In portraits of Northern European women, especially Scandinavian works from the 18th century to the early 20th century, there exists a remarkably consistent aesthetic tone. Faces are light, balanced, minimally adorned. Eyes are gentle, direct, yet never domineering. Beauty here is not built on display, but on calmness and inner strength. Ingrid Bergman fits that type exactly. When Bergman is placed beside portraits of Swedish, Norwegian, or Danish women by artists such as Carl Larsson, Anders Zorn, or anonymous Scandinavian portraits preserved in Nordic museums, the resemblance is striking. The same balanced facial structure, the same gentle yet deep gaze, the same sense that this woman does not require jewelry or dramatic gesture to command attention. Bergman's beauty is not overwhelming. It resembles northern winter light, soft, cool, but enduring. Looking at her does not feel like being conquered. It feels like being invited into a quieter space. This beauty gave Bergman a rare cinematic advantage. She generated near absolute trust. Audiences believed her emotions, her pain, hesitation, sacrifice. Not because she performed excessively, but because her face carried the cultural honesty of Northern European women raised in restraint and sincerity. Yet for the same reason, Bergman faced difficulties few other stars encountered. She was ill-suited to Hollywood's traditional seductive roles. When placed into glamorous or overtly sensual molds, the result often felt off-key. Her face rejected artifice. In life, that clarity also burdened her with harsher expectations. When her personal life became controversial, public reaction was far more severe, because audiences did not view her merely as a star, but as a moral symbol. What unsettles many is this: Ingrid Bergman does not resemble any single famous Northern European woman from history. She resembles an entire artistic tradition, one in which beauty is bound to silence depth and inner discipline. As though Northern European painting had drawn this face many times until cinema finally found it and gave it a name. When watching Bergman on screen, one does not feel they are seeing a woman of the 20th century. One feels they are witnessing a face that once lived in paintings, now stepping into light, carrying northern stillness into a far noisier world. These faces may simply be coincidences of nature, or they may be lingering traces of history imprinted on human features. Whatever the answer, they compel us to look at the past differently. If you find these resemblances thought-provoking, leave a comment sharing the face that impressed you most, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so we can continue exploring the unnamed mysteries of Hollywood and history together.